Welcome to the Roy and Edna Disney CalArts Theater. REDCAT is CalArts' downtown center for contemporary arts. The performance will begin shortly. Please take a brief second to silence your cell phones or any other electronic devices. Please also locate the exit nearest to you. A staff member will guide you in the event of any emergency. Thank you for joining us. And now, a moment with the CalArts Indigenous Arts and Expression Executive Director, Chad Hamill.
We gratefully acknowledge that REDCAT operates on the land known as Yanga, a place that for millennia has been under the care and stewardship of the Tongva, Tataviam, and Chumash peoples, including the Gabrieleño, Fernandeño, and Ventureño, and other indigenous peoples who made their homes in and around the area we now call Los Angeles. We honor their ancestors, past, present, and future, and their vital presence through the generations as first peoples of this land.
Good evening and welcome to the final installment of the Ecofeminisms Practices of Survivance series, a collaboration between REDCAT and the CalArts Critical Theory MA in Aesthetics and Politics. Thank you all for coming out or watching from home, and thanks to those of you who have come back to various talks. My name is Janet Sarbanes, and I'm the series coordinator and a member of the MA faculty. I'd like to give a huge thanks to Daniela Lieja Quintanar, REDCAT's chief curator and deputy director, and the amazing REDCAT team for making this all possible, and to Erica Min, Logan Lochner, and MA director Andrew Culp on the CalArts side for their support. Each year, the CalArts Aesthetics and Politics MA program offers 2 courses with a public lecture component designed to stimulate thought and discourse around pressing issues of our time. With this series, we have looked at contemporary and historical approaches to environmental issues through the lens of ecofeminism, exploring how its originary insight, which paired the destruction of nature with the oppression of women, has evolved into a multi-system critique of the mutually reinforcing ideologies of sexism, naturism, racism, heterosexism, and transphobia, imperialism, capitalism, and speciesism. And yes, I have no problem roll calling the isms, especially at this moment in time when they are taking an especially virulent form. Tonight, we're very honored to have Greta Gaard as our final speaker. Greta joins us from the University of Wisconsin, where she is a professor of English and Women and Gender and Sexuality Studies. Her first anthology, Ecofeminism, Women, Animals, and Nature, from 1993, positioned interspecies justice as fundamental to ecofeminist theory, and was followed by the co-edited volumes Ecofeminist Literary Criticism, Theory, Interpretation, Pedagogy, International Perspectives in Feminist Eco-Criticism, and Contemplative Practices and Anti-Oppressive Pedagogies for Higher Education. Her influential article, Toward a Queer Ecofeminism, sparked developments in the field that became queer ecology. Her monograph, Critical Ecofeminism, which came out in 2017, earned her a position as a Fulbright Scholar in Germany. For many years, Greta has been a keeper of and a tireless advocate for ecofeminist ideas and practices, and it's been wonderful to engage with her work and her encyclopedic knowledge of the movement in seminar over the past few weeks and today. It's a pleasure to share it with you tonight. Please welcome Greta Gaard.
expand. So I want to thank Janet for inviting me to speak with you today about ecofeminism and the tools that it offers for a liberatory and fiercely compassionate approach to multi-species, ecological, and climate justice. Tonight's talk completes a life circle for me to speak with you in Los Angeles, the city where I was born, grew up, came out, found my spiritual practice, and went to the discos. I speak to you this evening as an animal, a female mammal whose body lactates to feed her offspring. Like humans, female bovines require 9 months of pregnancy before giving birth and nursing their young, and they nurse for 6 to 8 months after birth, weaning the calf gradually to ensure that they are able to eat on their own. Lactation is a feminist issue. Art, too, is a feminist issue, risky and rebellious. As Jeanette Winterson has written in Art Objects, the riskiness of art, the reason why it affects us, is not the riskiness of its subject matter, it is the risk of creating a new way of seeing, a new way of thinking. And she adds, the rebellion of art is a daily rebellion against the state of living death, routinely called real life. So I want to invite you into my recurring nightmare. And I want to give a caveat that I want you to join me in this only if it feels safe to do so. So I invite you to close your eyes and envision this nightmare with me. As a child growing up in the San Fernando Valley, I had a few recurring dreams, dreams that have powered much of my writing. One dream was of a cow, standing on a barren dirt landscape. She was seeking grass and chewing, and she stopped chewing to look at me. Behind her there was a pump jack, an oil rig, pumping oil out of the bare earth. Its metallic nose and chain went directly through the cow's bloodied neck, pulling oil up from the earth through her body. I would see this gruesome image for a few nights in a row, and then it would disappear. For years, sometimes. The dream returned on and off throughout my life. Finally, when Janet invited me to speak, I said, I've got to tackle this dream. I don't know what it means. And I'm calling the question here, what is the connection between milk and oil? If you've closed your eyes, you can open them. So I want to start with milk slavery. Lactation is chosen work for mothers who willingly nurse their own child or voluntarily nurse another mother's child. It can be a work of generosity in the case of lactating women who donate breast milk to mothers who are unable to produce breast milk. It can also be stolen work, as in the exploitation of enslaved Black women forced to breastfeed the master's children, while their own children were fed a nutritionally deficient gruel, a concoction of dirty water and cow's milk, while their mothers were giving white children their milk. Lactation has been imposed on or deprived from females of the biological class mammalia for many economic and ideological reasons. It may be due to our race, if we are women, but not white, due to our species, if we are female, but not human, due to our economic status, if we are not wealthy enough to be awarded family leave time, purchase a breast pump, afford childcare, or be defined as owners of ourselves and of our children. It can also be manipulated via marital status, if we're hetero or married. In other words, lactation is bio-wealth that can be stolen. It is a work of affection and attachment that for many has become unpaid slavery. And I want to take a moment to distinguish between the structures of oppression versus the objects of oppression. And that is, a structure of oppression is what I focus on, how oppression operates. And the objects within the structures may have parallels, but they are not identical. It is the structure that takes a distinguishing feature of the other to be oppressed and can import them into that structure of oppression. So there's nothing inherently similar between a woman and a cow, except that we're part of the class Mammalia. And that is the feature that can pull women into that structure. So there are many political, philosophical, and ecological arguments against working less dominant others to death while promising their survival. But these arguments are not profitable in the calculus of the dominant economy. And I want to ask you to think about why that might be. That is, why is it a culturally acceptable and profitable practice to work subordinated others to death? I hope to answer that. So, I'm starting this exploration with the legalization of recombinant bovine growth hormone, RBGH, what Monsanto called bovine somatotropin, which the Food and Drug Administration finalized on November 5th, 1993, allowing its use in Monsanto's BST, called Posilac, in cows on February 3rd, making milk the first genetically engineered food to be sold in the United States. My editorial, Milking Mother Nature, written in 1993, but published in The Ecologist a year after the legalization of BGH, summarizes 5 key aspects of concern raised by a diversity of activists, feminists, farmers, and consumers, and here they are. First, our BGH treats cows like machines. In the current system of industrial farming, in this case, mother cows are treated as a machine kept in a perpetual cycle of gestation and lactation. This wears out their bodies very quickly. Their normal lifespan is between 20 to 25 years. A cow used in dairies is spent. That means biowealth translated into capital and taken, is spent after 5 years, and she is sent to slaughter. 20% of dairy cows become hamburger. So why does a cow have milk? Her calves are taken away from her in about 24 hours or less after birth. The males are confined into small wooden crates for their short lives of 15 weeks, and then they're fed an iron-deficient diet and taken, when they reach the weight of 330 pounds, they're taken to be slaughtered for veal. So that's how humans get veal. The females are fed a nutrient-dense milk replacement in order to take the place of their mothers when their mothers die. So in today's dairy industry, cows are being forced to overproduce milk. In 1930, the average cow in the United States produced 12 pounds of milk per day. That's a lot. That's 4,380 pounds a year. By 2024, the average milk production per cow is expected to be 2,000 gallons a day, or 16,657 pounds per year. This is why the body is worn out. Let's see. There are implications for human health. The American Dairy Council says that, quote, everybody needs milk. You've seen the milk mustache ads. And that milk has something for everybody. But the majority of the world's populations lose the enzyme lactase that digests lactase sugar in milk by the age of 4. Lactose intolerance is common among Vietnamese, Thai, Japanese, Arabs, Israeli Jews, and African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans. Who does that leave? White people. So this is digestible by a small group of the world's population, and it is really not needed. It is said to solve world hunger. Advocates of RBGH claim that higher milk output will increase the amount of food available worldwide, but in the countries that it's licensed for, you have people who cannot digest it. Worldwide, 70% of people cannot digest cow's milk because of lactose intolerance. Cow's milk is not part of most traditional diets. And the steady aggregate of surplus milk and butter in the decade preceding BST did not increase its availability. So these facts together indicate that the physical scarcity of milk is not a factor in world hunger. Come to that. The factors of world hunger are, of course, poverty, the expense of food, climate change, damage to crops and infrastructure, conflicts and wars, food waste, and gender inequality. That is, in many traditional societies, the men and boys eat first, and the girls and women eat last. So this is what causes more hunger. Loss of small farmers. BGH costs money to purchase. And we see this with a lot of genetically engineered foods as well, that the small farmers have to take loans in order to use the genetically engineered products. And this can drive small farmers out of business. Agribusiness, whose herds in 1993 numbered between 5,000 to 10,000 cows, can afford to purchase the high energy feed in bulk. Yet a 3% surplus in milk produced can mean a 30% decrease in the price that a farmer can get because too much quantity. Farmers who reject RBGH are depicted by industry as less sophisticated and behind the times, and their reluctance to adapt is blamed for hastening their own bankruptcy. Consumers initially rejected RBGH when they knew about it. In 1993, the government was already spending $1 billion annually to purchase surplus milk supplies in the form of butter. The milk support program was estimated to have risen by $65 million in 1993 and set to increase further. But by 2024, the USDA was offering $58 million in assistance to help organic dairy producers. So there was enough. So milk gives us an opportunity to bring an ecofeminist perspective onto the technology of motherhood. That is, understanding the use of BGH and these other forms of biotechnology reveals the assumption that the view that science can and must improve upon nature, and that nature can and must be controlled. It is not surprising that cow's milk was one of the first instances of technological intervention, as cultural projections view the cow as maternal and natural. So there were alliances against oppression, small farmers, consumers, people interested in health, human health, and the grocery lactivists, which was us, the Lake Superior Greens. So after, when this became available, we went into grocery stores and put these boxes of so-called butter. And they gave the data of what the problem was. So Land of Lakes is a Minnesota company, so we called it Land of Fakes and designed this butter carton. And then it was fun to watch people, kind of take it and then put it back. So multi-species ecofeminisms is what I'm going for here. As you can see, an ecofeminist perspective illuminates the intersections among culturally determined values and devaluations. As second wave feminism advised, start where you are, and this perspective began by recognizing the overall feminization and racialization of socially constructed and devalued natures, leading to intersections of multiple and multiply devalued subordinated others. So this is people on race, sex, gender, age, ability, class, culture, religion, spirituality. So to contrast that, then, ecofeminism uses an analytical lens to understand this nexus of oppression and envision the possibilities for freedom. So here, in the 1980s, Vandana Shiva was writing about the Chipko movement, the Hug the Tree movement. These women were not tree huggers in the Euro-Western sense. The trees were their livelihood. So when the corporations came to cut down trees, women placed their bodies against the trees because it was how they made a living with the trees. This is Aurora Castillo. She worked with her community near downtown Los Angeles when the garbage burner was planned to be sited in downtown Los Angeles, and they got the priests to help them in their argument, and she's one of the many winners of the Goldman Environmental Prize. This is Feminists for Animal Liberation, also started in 1980, marching in an animal rights march. Marty Keel is there right above like the O, the between feminists and for. She was one of the co-founders. And this was the first group to bring a feminist perspective to the issue of multi-species oppression. So ecofeminisms overall are based on a relational selfhood of interbeing that challenges the resourcism and the practice of instrumentalizing others for a privileged self, for the benefit of a privileged self. Vandana Shiva, surely you know from India, has done a lot of work on biotechnology, and with Maria Mies published the book Ecofeminism, their collected writings. Wangari Maathai, taking care of the trees, not again because she's a tree hugger, but because planting the trees supports women's livelihood in Kenya. And if you have a chance to read her biography, you will see that she was beaten by men who felt she was a woman out of her place, even though she had advanced degrees, and came back to talk about forestry. So she stood up for women's livelihood and for trees. Ecofeminism addresses the current crises of global inequalities, of hate, violence, the separations that we make, the divisions that we make between people, other species, and the land, the importance of health, ecological health, human health, multi-species health, economics that is sustainable and not extractivist, and self-determination. Petra Kelly, the co-founder of the German Green Movement, also identified as an ecofeminist. She and her partner, Gerd Bastian, were murdered. Someone broke into their apartment, came in and shot them. Winona LaDuke, she lives in northern Minnesota and has been part of, and we have been part of, her activisms, and she has been part of those of us in the Duluth, Great Lakes, Greens, and in the Twin Cities. So ecofeminism overall envisions a just and sustainable way of living that prioritizes inclusive, diverse, and multiracial gender justice and multi-species well-being. So I want to move on to this milk and oil thing. And here you see, I found a picture that looks kind of close to that dream. So the first part here is looking at California's milky history. California is the 7th largest producer of crude oil in the United States, and since 1993, California has been the largest dairy producer in the nation, with over 95% of its production coming from large dairies. That's 1,000 or more cows. So this dream that I had in 1965, was it already happening? Apparently it was, and it's just intensified. So in this first part, these are an ad from a newspaper. California has a colonial and speciesist history, as you probably know. In the 1700s, the Spanish missionaries brought the cattle for fat, skin, and milk. From 1812 to 1840, people on the Sonoma coast milked cows, shipped the butter and cheese to Alaskan trappers of martens, wolverines, and wolves. So you have this dual exploitation already of the cows being milked, which means their cows aren't getting the milk. And then the butter and cheese being sent to other people who are also making their living by killing other beings, a transfer of wealth from animals to humans. At this time, in 1860, there were 264,000 people in California and 104,000 cows. The principal dairy regions were San Francisco Bay and the Sacramento Valley, and this clipping here is from 1884. Another clipping, Los Angeles milk. As people moved into the Los Angeles area, the Chino Valley sugar beet production of 1917 became dairy production by 1926, and the Los Angeles dairies moved out of the more populated area into a more agricultural area for the more affordable land. In the 1960s, there were 172 dairies built, but in the 1970s, 350 dairies and 300,000 cows. This clipping is from Pomona Progress, 3rd of June, 1922. Chino is the district taking the lead in the dairy industry. From Food and Water Watch, and I have to give a plug for Winona Howder, who I've been in contact with since the 1980s and hadn't talked to her for 10 years, and called her up and said, hey, I'm doing this work, and she's like, I remember you. It's so nice when somebody remembers other activists. So here's what we know about milk cows on California's mega dairies, thanks to Winona Howder. There are 1.7 million cows on these mega dairies, averaging each dairy 2,300 animals. How can you get to know 2,300 animals? The mega dairies produce 9.2 billion pounds of manure annually, 4 times the waste of all the poop in LA. Enough to fill 45 Olympic-sized swimming pools each day. Before the methane digesters, the untreated manure was stored in liquid lagoons and releasing methane, ammonia, nitrous oxides, or spread on the farmland. In the San Joaquin Valley, the Central Valley of California, which is where 90% of California's dairy cows are. It has a high ratio of Latinx residents versus the state. So there's concentration of Latino workers there. And the residents in the communities of the mega dairies experience flies. They smell manure every day, night and day. This keeps them indoors with their windows closed. The mega dairies produce 68.3 billion pounds of manure each year. And they believe that dairy digesters are the answer. So this is a dairy digester in practice. So the dairy digester puts all the poop in a lagoon and covers it with plastic. And the idea is that the poop and the liquids separate, and then the manure can be used as fertilizer. This takes quite a while. During that time, the dairy contributes to air and water degradation. The odors are horrific, according to residents. The climate impacts are bad. If you think about the fact that capturing methane for biogas requires larger and larger factory farms, it's not profitable to create a small farm. 10% of US methane emissions come from manure management. The intensified waste means more ammonia, more nitric oxide emissions, and water pollution. I cite my source down there. The number of dairy farms with manure digesters has doubled in 4 years, from 2020 to 2024. California made the decision to highly value manure biogas, which doubled the number of the manure biodigesters. Critics are saying, let's not sell methane from the manure, because having more manure is not helping our environment. It's not helping our workers. It's not helping our residents. This is where America's manure digesters are located nationally. If you were curious, I was curious. Where are they? And you can see how they're clustered in California. So California's getting the poop. A little bit, a few clusters here, but mostly it's here. Okay. Avian flu, which you know because you just lived through it, is affecting dairy cows and poultry just this past year in Tulare and Fresno, which are towns in the Central Valley. And this is an image taken from a newspaper of what dairy cows, what they do with the carcasses if they pass away while in the stalls. They put them outside the dairy because they're afraid that it will the avian flu will spread, and the carcasses stay there and attract flies. California dairies were told to expect a 2% mortality for bird flu, for 10%, 15% of cows dying, perhaps. But what happened was the virus affected 50 to 60% of the animals in the herds. I don't have a mortality statistic on that, but these are sick animals. In the Central Valley, the daytime temps can exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The barn cats, there were articles about this, that drank the infected milk died. And there were also articles about people in LA who bought raw milk for their house cats, and the house cats died. So it was a zoonotic transmission. The state's most vulnerable workers in the Central Valley are breathing this, and they're around this. We monitor wastewater, but not in the areas where these workers are. So we do not know who is being affected. Meanwhile, the dairy workers don't report being sick because they need the money. They need to keep their jobs. And bird flu was found in 4 Riverside County rats this last February, so it's still on the move. The air quality for the Central Valley dairies in California, This air quality is the worst air quality in the nation. Where did you think it was going to be? Where else did you think it was going to be? This is it. It's the worst air quality in the nation because of the megadairies. So the groundwater is contaminated with high levels of nitrates from the manure and the wastewater from the dairy farms. The groundwater, for many people in the Central Valley, is their primary source of drinking water. There are lower environmental quality ratings in the Central Valley. There's no restrictions of significance placed on the dairy industry's degradation of water and air quality. And the Central Valley has disproportionately more disadvantaged communities, by which I mean people of color and working class or poverty class white people who are reliant on groundwater for drinking. So this sort of blow up of the Central Valley there points out to where the dairy digester projects are and the San Joaquin Valley. And if you look at ammonia concentrations across the US, it's us, it's here, it's not elsewhere. So this is what we're looking at, is a nexus of oppression based on elements of species, gender, the female, race, communities of color, economics, working and poverty class, housing, and water. So on the left you have Central California Environmental Justice Network, farm workers marching to ban these chemicals that they're working with. And on the right, for equal balance, you have a poverty class, white mother and her 5-year-old son in Fountain Trailer Park. And they try to buy bottled water, but it's not cheap. And you see here on the bottom, the arsenic level in Fountain Trailer Park, parts per billion, is over the public health goal, which is at the bottom. The maximum contaminant level is 10%. The parts per billion are over 80%. North Edwards, which is the city, the more middle-class white part, the average arsenic level is still above the baseline, still above the recommended level, but much lower, peaking at 40%. This is environmental and economic racism. As Winona pointed out, and then it was published in Vox, cow's milk has a larger environmental footprint than plant-based milk. If you look on the left, cow's milk, and the greenhouse gas emissions is 3.15 kilograms. Then beneath it is soy milk, oat milk, and almond milk. Eutrophication, which means water pollution, cow's milk is highest. Land use, cow's milk is highest. Fresh water use, which we don't have an unlimited supply of. Again, cow's milk is higher. Okay, so this is Winona. And she says, we need to stop believing that we can only do what's politically possible. We have to fight for the vision of the kind of world that we want. And she came up with some steps to stop the egregious misuses of California water. And step one is ban the megadairies. Ban their expansion, ban the existing ones. Place a moratorium on new oil and gas. So she's like already got that connection. Transition to 100% renewable electricity generation like solar and wind. And define all water, groundwater, rainwater, all water as a public trust, a resource, not a commodity subject to resource extraction at the expense of the public. So I want to pause for a moment and ask you to think about what questions are not being asked about cow's milk. What questions are not being asked? And I love this picture because I love this little girl here in the middle, so I want to stop for a second and ask you, concurrent, what is not being asked? Can I see anybody? Can't see. You can just shout it out. What's not being asked?
How old are the cows?
How old are the cows? 5 and under.
What do they want?
Thank you. So in reading this, I skipped that section where an industrial dairy farmer said a cow's primary purpose is to give milk. And I just wondered, can we take the microphone and ask her, like, what's your primary purpose? I don't think that's what she'd say. I think she'd say something else. I don't know what she'd say, but I'm pretty sure that's not it. Yeah. What else might be not asked? Okay.
Does it hurt?
Does it hurt? Thank you. That's a good one. That's a very good one. These are what I came up with. When and why do cows have milk? Because they have someone who wants to eat their own child, their own offspring, their own calf. What happens to their calves? This is not part of the discussion. In all of the literature that I was reading on dairy research, it's not part of the discussion. What happens to their calves? So it's not a cow-centric discussion. It's a commodity-centric discussion. So imagine being the female in that situation where everyone else is talking about you as a commodity. This is a feminist issue. It's a kind of slavery. Do the mothers notice the calf's absence? Well, those of you who saw cow, you bet. They grieve. They demand. They're enraged. Is it ethical or just profitable to keep using a female for reproduction, never allowing her to keep her offspring? Would you use this practice on humans? And if you did, what would you call it? We know. Okay. When the cows can't conceive or lactate any longer, what happens? They're slaughtered. They become hamburger. Okay, oil. Remember that dream? It's the cow in the oil rig. As you know, La Brea Tar Pits is kind of close to here. And if you grew up in Los Angeles, and if your parents had the interest, time, and money to take you to the sites around the town, chances are you visited La Brea Tar Pits, or you have by now. I always wonder, what is it that makes the agonizing struggles and deaths of saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, wolves, ground sloths, bison, horses, and one prehistoric woman suitable entertainment for children? Perhaps it is Euro-Western culture's training and congratulating ourselves on our good fortune by distancing ourselves, renouncing the possibilities of care and empathy, from learning anything from the histories of other species or from racialized, gendered others. Children are told that the tar pits and their killing power happened too long ago to care, really. It was the Ice Age, 11,000 to 50,000 years ago. But what we didn't learn, at least in the 60s, was that the woolly mammoths and the indigenous people of California, the Tongva of Channel Islands, the Chumash living along the coast of what is Malibu, used the asphalt from La Brea tar pits and elsewhere around what is now Los Angeles to seal their canoes, waterproof their baskets. We didn't know that the killing power of La Brea tar pits oil is still present today. And few of us learned in grade school about colonization and its impact on indigenous people. So I want to just pull forward this history, and I'm talking structures of oppression, remember that from the beginning. Father Pedro Font, California's History of Settler Colonialism and Indigenous Enslavement. Before the rancheros from Mexico ruled California, indigenous communities were invaded by Europeans through the settlement of Catholic priests and missionaries. You would think because they're Christian, they might be kind, but no. This is what he wrote in his journal about the indigenous people. They are so savage, wild and dirty, disheveled, ugly, small and timid, that only because they have the human form is it possible to believe that they belong to mankind. During the mission period from 1769 to 1834, the Indian population at the missions, according to one estimate, declined from 72,000 to 18,000, with deaths exceeding births by 60%. The death rate within the missions equaled that of the worst slave plantations in the South. So California does not have clean hands, pointing to the South. Okay, according to the History Project at UC Davis, some mission Indians sought to escape the system by fleeing from the Padres. A few Indians openly revolted and killed the missionaries. Oh well. Okay, so as a practice of healing from this horrible, violent history, there's an online exhibition from the Autry Museum that I really recommend, and I just pulled a couple from it. This is called Mission Life, produced in 1998, and the sign outside here says in reverse, Franciscan showers, drawing a parallel to the Nazi showers. And this other one, Another Dead Indian, by Catherine Nelson Rodriguez, shows the ghosts of the Padres here on the road, and the way that the genocide of Indigenous people is still being perpetuated today. And these cycles of violence continue. Okay. And here is Elena Maria Viramontes, whose book I just taught, so it was really top of my mind. Under the Feet of Jesus is about a farm worker, a migrant farm worker family, and Estrella, who's the hero of the family, 14 years old. This is the turning point for Estrella, when they're trying to get medicine for her friend and maybe romantic interest, Alejo, who needs medicine, and they can't afford it. And she goes out to the car and gets a crowbar, and she thinks about, what am I going to do with this crowbar? And it says, and she remembered the tar pits, energy money, the fossilized bones of energy matter, how the bones made oil, and oil made gasoline. The oil was made from their bones. That is, that their lives, their labor was ground up to become the thing that fueled the settler colonialism. And that's when she goes into the nurse and slams the crowbar down on the table and says, just give us back our money. Very powerful scene. So we're into oil. This is a Los Angeles City oil field at the turn of the century. The first California oil well was drilled in 1865 in Humboldt County. The first gusher arrived in 1876 in Pico Canyon. And the gold rush preceded the oil rush by 20 years. But both of them were characterized by a surprise discovery, news coverage, opportunities for investors, a call for manual labor, opportunities for homeowners who would live there but lease the living earth around their homes for mining. So in the case of oil, think oil plantation, because it's a structure of relations that can seize any subordinated being or object and extract its vitality and wealth. So this is Los Angeles oil explosions. There were a lot of explosions. And people using these antiquated fire hoses trying to put out the fires. The Los Angeles oil boom from 1917 to 1925 is named that way because there's so many oil strikes all across the Los Angeles basin. People moved to Los Angeles to try and strike it rich. Between 1920 and 1930, the population of Los Angeles more than doubled, from less to 600,000 to more than 1.2 million. Oil was the factor, beyond petroleum. The oil boom in Los Angeles also coincided with the real estate boom during the 1920s. This is the Signal Hills oil field right near Long Beach. You probably still know it, it's still there. Oil was first discovered in Signal Hills in June 1921, and it went from being a sleepy little rural town to the richest community in the nation. In the winter of 1922-23, Long Beach Press advertised small plots of land for sale in a community they called Petroleum Gardens, with all the oil rights included. So you could have your house there, and you could dig for oil underneath your house. People were so happy about it that there's this postcard from the history, making it look kind of pretty. Venice Beach was also really taken for oil. I think most people in LA know that Venice Beach, named for Venice, was originally sort of begun as a speculative real estate fantasy with canals and gondolas in 1905. But by 1926, Los Angeles annexed Venice, and in 1929, Ohio Oil Company found oil southeast of Venice. LA zoning prohibited oil drilling in residential and commercial sections, but by March of 1930, people were clamoring to get oil rights for drilling underneath their homes. 5,000 Venice residents demanded an end to these drilling restrictions. Like, don't protect me. It's my house, my land, my money. And they went to petition eliminating drilling restrictions everywhere in Los Angeles. Landowners had specific rights. So there was a coalition formed to protect their real estate investments from drilling, a huge controversy in Venice, and people were watching this unfold. Eventually, oil derricks were erected on the small house lots, and then they became town lot fields. So people in a block, if there were enough people in the block who agreed on oil drilling, then it would happen to everybody's house, and the profits were just divided evenly among the houses. The drilling went on night and day. I don't know where this quote is, but one resident said that you couldn't sleep, really, because the racket kept going. The odors were horrible. So during the 1930s, Venice property values fell, but their costs rose for policing, firefighting, and infrastructure repairs to the town lot fields. After 1932, many oil wells in operation had depleted the underground gas pressure, so they couldn't even get the oil out. Other communities who had watched the downfall of Venice outlawed oil exploration in their towns. Santa Monica, Vermont, Wilshire, Delray Hills, Redondo Beach, all said, we're not going to do it. Then World War II came. And after December 7th's attack on Pearl Harbor was linked with national war goals and patriotism, oil companies stepped up and said that oil wells were necessary for the war effort. Exploratory oil wells went into residential areas in Elysian Park, in Wilmington and Venice. And anyone who's driven to go dancing in Wilmington has seen the gas flaring. Even though it's supposed to be shut down. I think it's this year that huge production is supposed to be shut down. The oil wells worked hard to control and deflect regulation. The companies voluntarily adopted oil conservation measures, trying to control the noise and use fire reduction technologies, and this calmed the public. The Navy and War Production Board demanded that LA open the whole city to oil wells during World War II, and the city pushed back. So the oil industry basically transformed Los Angeles from an agricultural to a largely industrial economy, and Los Angeles's African American communities felt these changes especially. There's a term, fossil fuel racism, that I found in the Journal of Energy Research and Social Sciences, and it argues that in the United States, the public health hazards from air and water pollution and risks associated with climate change fall disproportionately on Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor communities. Sacrifice zones and systemic racism are deeply intertwined within the fossil fuel-based economy. Their solution is to disrupt the power of the fossil fuel industry and their state allies through a managed phase-out of fossil fuel production, the enactment of wider programs with social, economic, and democratic reforms via a Green New Deal. And then it's the Beverly Hillbillies. So this sitcom ran for, was it 7 or 9 years? 9 years, yeah. Is there anybody in here who grew up watching the Beverly Hillbillies besides me? Okay. Okay. So this was, what happens when these rural people come to town. It shows that they don't have the culture and class of the people in Beverly Hills, but instead what they have is more integrity. They have some ethics, commitment to honesty, fair dealing. So it kind of played both sides of the aisle on this one. So I moved to this now to the, where is the oil today? Many of you will recognize these islands, the 4 islands outside of Long Beach. They're fake. They were built to hide oil rigs. So these Thumbs Islands were built in 1965 to tap into the East Wilmington oil field. The landscaping and sound walls were designed to camouflage the operations. They are the only decorated oil islands in the United States. That's a dubious claim to fame. They were renamed in honor of astronauts. They were purchased by Occidental Petroleum in 2000. One of these islands has a waterfall. So, you know, in Los Angeles, the art of illusion is very popular. So we return to Beverly Hills, and there are at least 4 oil wells in operation in Beverly Hills, the first one being in the Beverly Center. I remember going there when it first opened. Everybody was so surprised. It's so amazing, so beautiful, so oily. Since 2008, Beverly Center's kidney bean shape was designed to accommodate drilling. It is one of 2 sites within blocks of Beverly Hills. This 26-year-old mall, how did that happen, houses 160 retailers, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and Burberry, and the pumping operations on the right side here are hidden behind a wall between Macy's and Bloomingdale's. The Hewlett-Packard oil well, built in 1967. It's designed to look like an office building from the street level, but inside an oil derrick can move about on the tracks, accessing any one of the 50 wells in operation. Cardiff Tower is a camouflaged oil drilling site on West Pico Boulevard with 40 active oil wells in the Beverly Hills oil field. Occidental Petroleum disguised this site as a synagogue in 1966, so it would fit in with the historically Jewish neighborhood. It was rebuilt in 2001 with the pseudo-shul, now the property of Pacific Coast Energy, home to 40 oil wells, which are accessed by a movable derrick that taps the same oil field as the Tower of Hope. So how many of you know about the Beverly Hills oil field? I don't know if this is like a big talk everybody knows or nobody knows. Okay, so I'll review it. Let's see. On the grounds of what became Beverly Hills High School, the first oil wells were drilled in 1906, predating the school by 20 years. Later, those under what became the school's football field were abandoned and capped. But in the 1950s, 2 more pump jacks began next to the girls' athletic field, across from 20th Century Fox's back lot, and another 25 wells were also added. The ground beneath the science building was the sump pit for oil waste. In the early 1980s, Beverly Hills High School, which I'm going to just say BHS, permitted the drilling of 17 new wells, and the city amended its municipal code in 1979 to say that oil drilling would be prohibited everywhere in Beverly Hills, except at the high school. The city and the schools both were promised 5% of the royalties. A few residents objected, but the majority of BH residents liked their royalty checks, which offset their property taxes, and the funds paid 85% of the teachers' salaries. So this is how the high school was funded. Then the operation was sold to Vinoco, who pumps 30,000 gallons of oil a day from these 17 wells on 7/10 of an acre at a drilling site at 9865 Olympic Boulevard. Found this online. I'm like, what's that 986? Oh, it's the high school. The school receives about $300,000 a year, some say $700,000 in royalties, courtesy of the hundreds of barrels of crude oil and 350,000 cubic feet of natural gas extracted from beneath the high school. In 1987, new state regulations and Chevron sent letters to residents advising them of their use of hazardous chemicals. They are located on or beneath your property to keep the wells operating and to make the oil flow more easily. No one in Beverly Hills complained. When the oil field was purchased by Vinoco, they decided they needed to make it pretty. So they launched a beautification of the oil derrick on the south side of BH, and they used photographs of art created by terminally ill children. And the children's decoration of the soundproofing panels covered the derrick. Children in wheelchairs used telescope brushes. Those who couldn't use their hands were given shoes with paintbrushes. Those who couldn't use their arms or feet used a fruit-flavored mouth paintbrush. The beautification of the oil rig was portrayed as an act of philanthropy. and the rig itself was titled The Tower of Hope, or as some later called it, The Tower of Hope You Don't Get Cancer. A decade later, poisons from the rig would cause another generation of students to become ill. And this is how I found Joy Horowitz's book, Parts Per Million, The Poisoning of Beverly Hills High School, published in 2007. Horowitz graduated the high school in 1971, and she went to her 30th class reunion. It was a year late in the summer of 2002, and a lot of her classmates, whom she was looking forward to seeing, had died. They'd had cancer. Some of them had multiple cancers. And she said, when you're a person in your 40s, that's too young. Then the following February of 2003, Erin Brockovich got involved, and a deeper reality was opened. They found the two industrial sites, the oil derricks and the power plant, were operating at Beverly Hills High School. And over time, a lawsuit followed, as a number of people with cancer came forward, people who had attended the high school, people who had run the track right next to the oil. They ended up with 1,000 plaintiffs, 400 with cancer. The community said that these emissions are inconsequential to the children's health. There were 3 epidemiological studies documenting the cancer cases for Beverly Hills High School. The first one, the Los Angeles Cancer Registry, found a 3-fold excess of thyroid cancer among young men living adjacent to the Beverly Hills High School. Another study out of Boston University's School for Public Health found excess rates of cancer among graduates of Beverly Hills High School from 1990 to 2000, 3-fold for Hodgkin's disease, twice the expected amount of thyroid cancer, and elevated rates of testicular cancer. Another study was never made public. An epidemiologist who did a lot of work for industry at the University of Alabama, his study cited earlier studies, but couldn't be used because it didn't go through peer review. So in November 2006, the judge dismissed the first 12 plaintiffs' cases. And in the end, the lawyers for the oil corporations challenged the evidence and demanded the highest levels of proof, that is 95% certainty. Now you probably know this, but 95% certainty is what's required on scientific research. In order to get your research published, you needed 95% certainty, rather than 94. And these studies had 94. So as Joy Horowitz said, as a society, we wait for proof of harm, rather than insisting on proof of safety. A decade later, in 2018, Beverly Hills High School started the oil well remediation project, capping the 20 wells, removing underground tubing, pumps, rods, filling with cement 8,000 feet of oil wells, removing the derricks, and by November 2020, after spending $40 million, the final oil well was capped. So this calls into question, I just want to pose the possibility that the founding claim of environmental justice is that hazardous production and toxic waste sites are most often located in low-income communities and communities of color, and it needs a little augmentation. The Beverly Hills High School oil case was not a case involving economically or racially marginalized populations. It was economically elite youth and their families, many of them who saw themselves as aligned with the oil companies, as wealth, the people of wealth. They got their dividends. They thought everything was working before their students contracted cancers. Accustomed to aligning themselves with other economic elites, these families did not expect the inevitable outcome. That is, that their children's health or cancers would be seen as inconsequential. That happens to other people. Invisible and unspoken beyond thinking, did the Beverly Hills High School faculty, staff, and parents assume the view that hazardous production and toxic waste happen to other people? We are accustomed to oil in Los Angeles. It is everywhere. These are excerpts from a photo essay montage by a man named Alan Taylor, who published, it was called The Urban Oil Fields of Los Angeles, published in The Atlantic in 2014. And these are just a few clips An oil well next to junked hearses and ambulance. If that isn't telling you something, I don't know what is. Pump jacks and an on-ramp and off-ramp. Oil derrick towers on the hillside of a canyon. We're used to seeing them. Oil wells next to a municipal cemetery. Again, oh, that's telling. Here's another oil well right next to someone's home. Children play there. So this is the Los Angeles City oil field, and if you look at this, I tried to look at where are we in downtown. We're just south of it, where it says Los Angeles at the bottom. I don't know if this laser pointer will point. Probably not. So it's below the nexus here, where it says Los Angeles, densely like below. That's the main oil field of Los Angeles. That's the one that Ed Doheny found and started the oil rush. When you look at oil across Los Angeles, these are where the main deposits are. In Los Angeles oil field, in the oil in greater Los Angeles, an average of 66% of active and idle oil wells leak methane, which means that 67,513 oil wells in California are leaking methane. This toxic gas puts nearby residents at higher risk of asthma attacks, cancer, and other health problems. It is also a major contributor to climate change. Refineries. California has 11 refineries that produce 90% of our gasoline and diesel. 4 are in the San Francisco Bay Area, 1 is in Bakersfield, and 6 are in Los Angeles: Carson, El Segundo, Torres, and 3 in Wilmington. Wilmington is also, as you know, low-income, people of color, largely community. So these toxins are right there in the air where people are living, children are living. So here's the map of disadvantaged communities in California. You're probably not surprised to see that the disadvantaged, and this is in terms of health, food, work, air quality, everything is in the Central Valley. This is where the oil is. Central Valley, a little bit in Los Angeles, towards the coast. And what map is this, do you think? It's the dairies. So here's our connection. California's largest producer of dairy, 7th largest producer of oil, largest producer of methane. If California cattle were an oil or gas basin, they would be as large as the Permian Basin. But right now cattle are down, what level are they? California cattle are at 244 at number 7, but if they were an oil or gas basin, because the combined emissions from dairy and beef cattle in California exceed the methane emissions of any oil or gas basin in North America, except the Permian Basin of West Texas and New Mexico, the largest oil field on the planet, and likely the largest source of methane emissions in the nation, even comparing to Alberta tar sands. So, I thought you'd want to know, what are people planning for phasing out? New York is ahead of us in phasing out fracking. Our conversations have taken longer. The ban on new fracking permits began just last year in California, and in 2045, California has promised to phase out oil extraction. Will you be alive? Will you be healthy in 2045? So, as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Where do we stand? Are we the oppressor or the oppressed? Or do we have one foot in each category? So back to milk and oil. We return to the dairy parlor, where cows are manually impregnated at the age of 15 months, where heat stress, unsanitary conditions, and zoonotic diseases produce dead and dying cows, where the newborn calves are taken from their mothers within 24 hours. We go back to the oil fields, where the contrasts of wealthy estates and working class minimum wages flourish, along with housing beside pump jacks, oil spills, and the willingness to sacrifice our young people and their health for profit. The oil-soaked land, the oil-soaked birds, the choked air. What does the cow who stares at us want us to see, to know, as the pump jack goes in and out through her neck about the connections between milk and oil? So I woke up with that question one night at 3 a.m., and I was drawn to the writing of two feminist foremothers. Adrienne Rich, oops, skipping right here. So here's the review. Colonialism, extractivism, racism, gendered speciesism, classism. These are the intersectional racisms and sexisms. It's a multi-species maternal and child abuse. Young people in Beverly Hills High School, calves, Latino children. So this is a massive transfer of wealth, life, energy, and self-determination. Adrienne Rich's book on lies, secret, and silences, where she says the liar lives in fear of losing control. They cannot even desire a relationship without manipulation, since to be vulnerable to another living being means the loss of control. And so I wondered, in what ways do the mega dairies fear losing control? What ways do they live in fear of losing control? In what ways are the mega dairies lying about their operations? And how does the continual extraction of oil function as a lie or as a fear of losing control? Silences. She says lying is done with words and also with silence. So what are the silences in these narratives about milk? And what are the silences in the narratives about oil? What is largely unspoken that is tried to bring forward in this exploration? And finally, she says secrets. The unconscious wants truth, as the body does. The complexity and fecundity of dreams come from the complexity and fecundity of the unconscious, struggling to fulfill that desire for truth. And I said, thank you, Adrienne Rich, for that comment on that dream. Audre Lorde, in Sister Outsider, tells us that poetry is not a luxury, and I want to expand the meaning of poetry here to mean art, dance, writing, music, all the poetry of your creativity. It is not a luxury. It is a practice through which we give name to ideas which are, until our art, nameless and formless, but are already felt. It is a distillation of experience from which true poetry springs, that births thought, as dream births concept, as feeling births idea, as knowledge births and precedes understanding. Poetry, your art, is the way that we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. Thank you. Should I turn this off or leave it on? Does it matter? Just leave it. Okay. Sorry. That was fantastic. Sorry, I'm just getting that one.
Thank you so much, Greta. That was really rich. Wow, what a striking dream. And then the way you sort of unfolded the talk around it. I want to make sure we have an opportunity to take questions from the audience. So I I thought I would just ask one question to begin with, or sort of maybe a comment question. I was really struck by your use of bio-wealth to describe milk, for instance. Because we often, and sort of part of extractivism is just talking about natural resources, right? Which belong to no one and are there for the taking and then are kind of commodified. But you talked about this transfer of wealth from non-human animals to human animals, and it was almost like a kind of primitive accumulation, I guess, sort of Marx would say. I was thinking of Silvia Federici also, and the notion of kind of taking the commons. And when I'm thinking of cattle grazing or cows sort of grazing, how those, were sort of penned in the early stages of capitalism and turned into private property. But that use of wealth is so interesting to me, and I feel like it goes back to the very first slide, where you talked about nursing or lactating as a form of generosity, as a gift, even though we always say the cows give milk, but it's not being given when we take it, right? But in lactation, there is this aspect of generosity, and I wonder if you could talk about this concept of bio-wealth that animals have. It's more than just they have something and we want it, but they're rich in it. And that kind of lines up with stealing, right? We steal from those who are rich. So I wonder if, I wonder if you had more to say about bio-wealth as a way of thinking about this versus natural resources.
I think that our culture steals from the poor to increase the wealth. And I think we're seeing it in the current administration. If the cows, the wealth that they have is theirs. And the reason this strikes me so much is because I had a baby later, after doing a lot of rock climbing, and learn, by hanging out with La Leche League mothers and really listening across difference there, let me tell you. But women would give breast milk. Women who had a lot of breast milk would give it to women who were struggling to feed their babies. And there were breast milk banks where women would deposit the breast milk so anyone could have it if they wanted to give their baby human breast milk. And it was a mind-blowing experience for me to think that women would just give it. At the same time, we saw people trying to commodify it. So there's this article I wrote toward a post-colonial analysis of milk, 2014, in the American Quarterly, and it was looking at trying to make food that they could sell to other humans, to market breast milk as a food. And I did have a clip in there which I can just reference. You guys have seen Mad Max Fury Road, right? The breeders. It tied up to the milking machines. And how that the mother's milk was intended to make the warriors really strong. And the visual narrative suggests, but never says the question, where are the babies? Where are the babies? They must have been offed. I don't know where, but they're not there. It's the milk that's the focus. So the idea of milk as gift, well, you can find in research stories of lactating mothers milking across species, that is adopting another infant from another species that the mother is dead or unable to produce milk, and they will feed too. So that's pretty amazing. That it's not just humans. I mean, there's this intelligence of caregiving and raising the young that goes across many mammal species.
Yeah, in our seminar earlier, you were talking about the animal's the absent referent for meat, and it seems like the calf, or in the Mad Fury movie, the reference, the absent referent is the babies in that instance. Yeah, yeah.
No one's ever said that. That's impressive.
No. I have one big picture question maybe before getting some thoughts from the people who are here on the talk. And you've been a historian of the ecofeminist movement as well as a participant. And I wonder if you can pinpoint for us some of the most maybe significant developments in ecofeminist thought and practice that you've witnessed or participated in over the years. I really appreciated the regionalism in your talk. You talked about the Midwest, where you are now, and then also, I never even thought of LA as an oil city, though of course it is, and I see the derricks all the time. But I wonder what are some of the most significant developments you would say since the 90s? That's a
90s,
huge question.
Yeah, it's a huge question. Well, that one slide where I showed you all the different ecofeminisms is kind of a good overview. That is that there was, Vandana Shiva, who is a wealthy woman, but working with, various more rural people in India. So there's that sort of agricultural and feminist element. Wangari Maathai, the agricultural and feminist movement. Petra Kelly, the Greens, the European Greens. I tried getting involved in the Green movement in the US for a while. No. No. Yeah, it didn't work. And you could really see it. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but it was male ego that really, guys who really wanted to be a star, but they couldn't be elected in the main channels because they were kind of quirky. Yeah, so, and also then a lot of people, like I remember the people at the Greens from Colorado reaching out and saying we can't even get a queer caucus going here. And this was when a legislation was going on in Colorado about making it illegal and to be gay, and I was like, first emergency, focus on your first emergency. If you're not alive, you're not going to be a Green. I mean, that you have to. So, so the Greens, the agriculture, spirituality, Charlene Spetnak, Carolyn Merchant's The Death of Nature, which looked at the Renaissance and the way how the scientific revolution really was a transfer of status and knowledge from earth-based rural midwives and herbalists, who were largely women, to male scientists who practiced animal experimentation without anesthesia, that huge term. These are all like the roots of what ecofeminism looks back to. Since then, there was a huge war of philosophy. The philosophers who despised the cultural ecofeminists, who were more like women's culture. So it's sort of a leftover of the 80s. The species battle has been central. It has really been central in the 90s and through 2010, I think. And now it appears that the inclusion of multi-species justice in ecofeminism, which many of us was like from the get-go, is becoming more widespread. And it's, I think, largely thank you to Black women who have become vegan, who have found that it's better for their health, better for their bodies, who are writing about it. Af and Sil Ko's work on Afroism, those books, this really helped a lot.
Thank you. I want to open it up to see if there are questions or thoughts.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. One thing I was curious about is in the comparison of oil and milk, obviously. I'm getting a sense that you're talking about milk as sort of having these two methods of circulation, a sort of like a more care-based form of circulation or a very extractivist one. And I was curious if that can be extended to talking about oil, like what is there for oil if not extractivism, if the comparison sort of ends there, or if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, the animals producing the oil are prehistoric. And so now the animals currently producing the oil are working class Latinos, people of color, and white people who are exposed to all sorts of toxins. I didn't even get that far as to, you can imagine this is a workplace issue. So you're asking what is the question between, what is the comparison between the milk?
Like if, I guess if milk can sort of be redeployed from mothers to children, or like these milk banks, for example, does oil just stay in the ground, I guess?
Yeah. Well, that's our best bet for survival, is for oil to stay in the ground. And the other commonality, that you heard between them is methane, one of the 4 leading greenhouse gases. So it would be to our benefit to keep the oil in the ground, oil in the soil, as they say. But we're really far gone at this point in this greed machine. It's terrifying how far gone we are. A revolution would be nice. Yeah. Yeah, Sean.
This is kind of maybe a geological question, but I was struck by the overlay of the dairy industry and especially the agricultural industry on top of these places where we are finding a lot of oil. And the Los Angeles basin is known for like the fertility of its soil. So is the Central Valley. Is there a geological connection between fertile land and land where oil is found, or is that just something that is mapped onto California, or do you know?
Yeah, I didn't explore that connection, but if you think about oil spills, it's not really land that I would like to use to grow my food in. If you think about all the manure, again, that is more than enough for growing something. So it doesn't seem to me to be a very healthy combination, the oil, the poop, and all the industrial. That the air quality is the worst in the nation. All these things should tell us this is not a good place for food. It's not a good place for humans to be working. It's not a good place for animals. Yeah. Any thoughts?
I just have a half-formed question, but I feel like I'm looking for some hopeful note, and I'm thinking about Val Plumwood's idea of backgrounding as a sort of process that this extractive sort of hegemony uses to create these absent reference or to distance us from the repercussions of what our system creates. And I guess I'm wondering if you've, in your work, have encountered ways of foregrounding the background or working against that force of backgrounding that seems to be so pervasive in this problem.
Well, I think actually having the invitation from you guys to speak and for having had this idea for so long was the opportunity to bring the background to the foreground. And I just can't tell you. I mean, I worked on it for 3 months. That's what it takes to produce an article. You know, I hope to like now polish it and then get it published so that it can enter the conversations. I think that some of our information can come to us in dreams. It comes, for me, the information always, it's the out of the corner of your eye kind of information that comes in. It's like, oh, what about this? You know, I mean, artists know this, that it comes when you're not paying attention, when you're not demanding it, that all of a sudden it's like, what if you did this, you know? And I'm grateful for those times and grateful for this opportunity, which called it forth and made room for the ideas. Yeah.
We, I think we read in Critical Ecofeminisms the idea of economic irrationality, or sorry, environmental irrationality, which is, yes, this is all around us and it's in the background and we never pull it to the foreground is one way of thinking about that. But also just that we're killing ourselves, right? You know, it's extremely irrational. So I really think it's interesting how you mediated this with a dream, right? Which is from the unconscious, but that is sort of somehow bringing to the foreground this irrational coupling that is basically poisoning the state, right? That you grew up in and that we all live in, yeah. Yeah, Erna.
Just sort of a half-formed thought as well.
Try to articulate it as best as I can. Like Jacob, I guess I've been sort of thinking about hopeful notes in all of this. It's difficult, I think, you know, being presented with this sort of narrative, as you're saying. We're very far gone with this. In fact, while you were talking, there was a poem that came to mind, which is Paul Celan's Death Fugue. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a kind of post-Holocaust poem, which has this very famous line that goes, "Black milk of morning. We're drinking you morning, we're drinking you in the evening, we're drinking you at night." And so that idea of black milk was kind of an image that stood out to me. But so I was kind of thinking, what are the sort of projects, politically, ethically, socially, that we can articulate on the basis of this? And sort of thinking also about what is actually the problem that we're seeing. So for example, one of your focuses is obviously on the mega dairy. So is it the mega that's the problem? And so we need to, it's okay to commodify milk to a certain extent, but if it's at that scale, you know, things become problematic. And so I was trying to sort of work my way down from there. You know, when you were talking about these sort of communities of women sharing breast milk, for example, and I remember that very well from when I had kids, I was sort of going all the way down to, okay, breastfeeding can be a very stressful moment, but there's also, I remember those moments also as sometimes when it works, being extremely peaceful. I mean, there's a kind of non-working that's happening when that's taking place. You can't really do anything else at that moment in time. It felt like the whole house shut down. We would find a place to sit down, a bench in a park, or, you know, and that would take place, right? So it feels like there's a kind of, in the act of lactating, of breastfeeding, of doing that, a kind of utopian moment that opens up as well, which at that point I guess is entirely outside of the logic of the commodity. I was grateful, you know, to Janet for bringing up Marx in this context, because I was thinking, what's the difference between biowealth and labor power? But I think there is a difference, and I think your talk really draws that out. But so is there something in the milk that can take us in another direction as well? I mean, it's not an anti-milk talk, I think. There are possibilities there. Can those be explored? Do you see anything there of hope, starting from that basic fact that, you know, can also be beautiful and maybe also a moment of almost utopia, potentially?
Well, milk is the fluid of relationship. It's a relationship between a lactating mother and a child. And without that relationship, it doesn't exist, it dries up. And so it has everything to do with our survival and our future as a species. And, but a lot is passed through that milk. You know, if the mother is unwell, if the mother is stressed, a lot of that gets passed through the milk as well. So you mentioned like this peaceful scene of milking. That's the ideal. like as a nursing mother, you think, I'm setting aside this. This is just for us. This time is just for us. For me to adore this child, and that's it. As far as what could it do, in that Toyota Postcolonial Feminist Milk Studies article, I talked about oxytocin, which is the love drug, the love hormone, and how oxytocin is released in the mother's body when you're nursing, and that's why as a nursing mother, you're just like blissed out. It's like, oh my God, this baby. It's a drug. Okay, your body is like you're dosing yourself with this oxytocin. But I found a study that proved that fathers who hold their child and have a bottle are also dosed with oxytocin. Their body floods with oxytocin. So I think we need more fathers to be using the bottle with their children and holding the baby close and spending the time. It's not just a woman thing, it's not just a mother thing, it's a parent thing, and it opens our hearts. And so it's hard to imagine what the cows are experiencing if oxytocin was something that would be available to them too. But now they're just clipped into a machine. And what does that do to their emotional body, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of scale is really important. That is what really struck me in everything, mega dairies and all of that. And you brought up Vandana Shiva and her intervention as a global South feminist, right? To talk, sort of talking about Indigenous women in India, rural women, and subsistence living, right? And that subsistence is not the same thing as poverty. It becomes poverty. People who have a subsistence way of life become poor when capitalism comes in and it basically takes the trees away, right? As you showed us. So there is something in this notion of scale, I think, that gets us to other forms of life, right? If we can get smaller, but not in and of itself, because those are ways of life where people know about the forest, right, and the trees and everything it can yield versus California. But anyway, yeah. Any other questions?
Hi.
One more.
It's just kind of also a comment connected with what you were saying about the mass and the scale, and in terms of like projects of resistance or activism. I really appreciate how you present us the cow and the dairy industry along with the oil. I was very surprised about Beverly Hills. I've been studying a lot about South LA, Inglewood, like places where Black and brown communities are being very affected, but also doing a lot of work. Like there's like a awesome long history of resistance there, and it's usually like local, like very local groups that has been able to kind of push, rather than like a big activism, in terms of thinking about the perfect example of Greenpeace, like these larger forms of resistance. I feel like the local resistance is very important to point out. Just want to mention the East Side Yard Environmental Justice is like a group in Commerce that has been able to push the oil drilling, to stop, not to stop the oil drilling, but at least stop creating new places for oil drilling. And I think this happened 2 years ago between Commerce and South LA. So yeah, I was just curious, you as a feminist and an activist too, what do you think about forms of resistance, thinking in larger groups, but also like in local efforts that are connected in coalition? Yeah.
Well, Haya Heller, who studied with Murray Bookchin, the Institute for Social Ecology, came up with this concept of first emergency. That, you know, like I said, the queers in Colorado, where it's like, green movement is not your first emergency right now. Just stay alive is your first emergency. That we can't really tell people what their first emergency is, although we can reflect back to them, you know, what I hear you saying is these things are, but really this is your survival kind of things. And right now, nationally, we seem to be in a first emergency. So, I mean, Californians will decide what is important to take on. The oil has been here a long time, and the thing that really scares me is the methane escaping from the uncapped oil wells, because it's a greenhouse gas, and it also is cancerous. And people are living right next to active rigs as well as not, and that you can see interviews with them on television where they're, oh, well, I'll only be here a couple of years. Baby, how long does it take? You know, do you think you want to spend a couple of years next to this, right? So educating people on these things would go a long way. I mean, if there were like an arts project that could come out of this that would educate people, like where are the oil wells? And I'm really fortunate with the maps that I got. Anybody who knows GIS, ArcGIS in here could pull up those maps. And it's very impressive to see them and to see where the wells are. The final thing that sticks with me on this is the Beverly Hills parents. That they wanted the money, they wanted the oil money. Did they know that it was cancerous? Did they know that it could affect their children's health? Did they know their children could have fatal cancers? Where, you know, our focus has been on environmental justice communities for so long, the parents are like screaming, get this out of our neighborhood. And then you have these very wealthy families that are getting paid to put their children next to toxins. I have like rolled this around in my head. How could they think that? And the two answers that I've come up with is the white racism, that this happens to other people. We're not people of color, so this isn't going to happen to us, which actually allowed it to happen to them. Or being blinded by wealth. I mean, the story of oil is really the story of greed. And it's a powerful force.
Okay. I think that we will stop there. Thank you so much.
On that upbeat note.